Hi, I'm Jackie Tantillo, and this is Should Have Listened to My Mother. This is a really exciting time for Should Have Listened to My Mother. We are now in our 5th season, and we've been nominated in 3 different categories for the 2024 People's Choice Podcast Awards, including Kids and Family category, Society and Culture, as well as Best Female Hosted Podcast. So that's pretty extraordinary. Winners are going to be announced at the end of September 2024. Thanks, as always, for your dedication and encouragement. We couldn't do any of this without you. Make sure you tell your friends, and you can find us wherever you listen to podcasts.
Congratulations.
Oh, thank you. That's my guess. Let me continue with this intro, and then you'll get to really hear what Sadie's all about. She's wonderful. It's always meaningful to present a new episode. I so look forward to sharing my guests' life lessons and experiences. Are you who you are today because of or in spite of your mother or female role model? You know, if you're lucky, you may have more than one female inspirational person in your life, and it doesn't always just have to be your mom. I've learned so much in preparing for this week's conversation. It concerns different neurodivergent conditions, which I was previously unaware. Hopefully, we can all learn something new and become aware and more sensitive to these conditions in others. You could say that this is an ode to neurodiversity. Sadie Dingfelder is an extraordinary woman with a wonderful sense of humor. Sadie is an author and freelance journalist. Her work has appeared in several prestigious publications, including National Geographic, The Washington Post, Washington Magazine. She's a former staff reporter for The Washington Post Express. She also served as a senior science writer at the Monitor on Psychology magazine, covering new findings in neuroscience, cognitive science, and more. She's recently published, and this is really exciting, her new book, Do I Know You? A Faceblind Reporter's Journey into the Science of Sight, Memory, and Imagination. Sadie has a condition called Severely Deficient Autobiographical Memory, or SDAM, and she's here to share stories of her relationship with her grandmother, Adele, who Sadie says is perfect and just brimming with fantastic folksy wisdom. I am so excited to have you on the show, Sadie Dingfelder. Welcome to Should Have Listened to My Mother.
Thank you. I'm thrilled to be here.
If you saw my computer here in the studio, I have all these Post-its with pronunciations for words like, here we go again. I'm going to do that one first. Prosopagnosia, aphantasia, SDAM, amblyopia, and strabismus. But we're going to get into that in a little bit because first, did I get them all right? Did I pronounce them correctly?
I'm sure you did it close enough.
Okay, because you're the expert. The reason I bring people together is because I feel that we have a lot to share from these women that have touched our lives, that have helped us move forward because of or in spite of. And I thought you had a pretty impressive story to share because I know Adele, your grandmother, played a significant role in your life. Can you tell us where and or the beginnings of when you realized the impact she would have on you?
So I have this condition called severely deficient autobiographical memory, which means that I do not remember much of my own life. And without realizing it, I've developed this wonderful compensatory strategy where I write constantly. I journal and and I write about myself for various publications these days. And what made my grandmother so influential and helpful to me is that she has always been a great cheerleader and archivist for me. She just really took me seriously as an author and as an artist when I was a little kid, and she never stopped. I mean, she has just Tupperwares full of everything I've ever written
Oh,
And,
God, that's great.
from like, and it's just been such a, I don't know that anyone else has taken me that seriously. So it really helped me believe in myself.
Was it because she knew that you had this difficulty, or she just, as a loving grandmother, she wanted to save your, like I have my boys' preschool art, probably throw it out when it's time, but we all parents, generally, parents or loved ones saves their children's or grandchild's artwork. Did she have a specific reason to save this, or she just wanted to, she cherished it?
We're a family of, we throw things out. She's unusual in her hoarding, I think. And I think though that she has training as a therapist, and she knew how important storytelling is to everyone. I don't know if she knew that it was of particular importance to me, but because for me, storytelling is really the only way that I can hold on to my past. But she intuited, and she's also just really believes in the power of art for self-expression. She does tons of art herself. She's amazing. She, in fact, she got kicked out of her senior center's art class for not following the directions.
Oh, I love her. I love her more.
I know, it's because they had like some specific craft that they wanted everyone to make the same thing, and my grandma just went off of the off of the plan.
She colored outside the lines.
Right, exactly. She just made her own thing, and she got the boot. But yeah, so my grandma, she started out as a dancer, but she got polio, and that sort of put an end to her self-expression through dance. She actually studied with Martha Graham in New York.
Wow.
But later in life in Tucson, she joined I called it an all polio survivor dance troupe, but actually the people had a lot of different disabilities, and I just loved it. It was almost as if in their limitations, they found new ways to express themselves through movement. And I think that's really what I do with writing, because I can't remember details. And I'm a reporter. And I think that, well, I have a lot of compensations. Like, for instance, I take a ton of pictures and I take very detailed notes. But also, my strength is picking up on the big picture and understanding themes and ideas more intuitively than I think people who do hold on to that big picture.
Well, I think that's a gift. They often say that these conditions, it presents, there's always a balance, right? With one thing that you're given, you either can overcompensate or compensate, or you have this ability to see above and beyond it, a strength that not everybody else has.
Yeah, the brain is all about trade-offs. And if you're excellent at holding on to details, often you do have trouble seeing the big picture, and vice versa.
So if you could, let's go back, because I could talk to you about both of these topics forever, and we'll get more into the neurodivergent conditions in a little bit. But where did your grandmother grow up? You mentioned Tucson, but is she from there originally?
No, she grew up in Paterson, New Jersey, and her family was very rich, but her father basically lost his part of the family fortune. So she always has had like kind of a unique perspective, I think, on like she would say things like, "Oh, my cousin was dating a painter, and she was very excited. She was like, 'Oh my gosh, what does he paint?' And my cousin said, 'Houses.'" And she still didn't get it. She was like, "Oh, like landscape?" And the cousin's like, "No."
Well, she has that vision, artist's vision, right? Of always seeing, like my mom, seeing the beauty in everything and in people.
Yeah, one of her words of advice, which I think I've sort of applied in a more middle class way, is that you always, it's good help is always worth the expense. But I think, obviously I don't have a staff. I think it's more about knowing your limitations and knowing how to ask for help from your friends or coworkers is sort of the underlying message there.
That's hard for a lot of people to do, to ask for help.
Yeah. It's very brave to ask for
It
help.
isn't it? It's very brave. And it's very brave what you're doing. Again, we're going to go back into your book in a little bit because there's so many wonderful messages to share, including that you don't really remember writing the book. Oh my gosh, your video was very funny. And all the links for Sadie's videos will be, and this one in particular I'm referring to, will be in my show notes. Do you know much about your grandmother's childhood? You mentioned her folksy wisdom and awareness. Where did she pick that up from?
So half of her family was actually poor. They're the Silversteins. She had like 1,000 cousins, and they all lived in this big house. And she just had like very practical solutions for that she picked up, I think, from her mother about like how to deal with the chaos of having this huge family, and specifically with dealing with your husband. And the one that I remember is that she said the secret to a happy marriage is hooks and baskets.
Okay.
It sounds like Chutes and Ladders or something, but basically the idea is your husband or your children are going to just drop stuff everywhere. And but if you just put baskets where they drop things or hooks on the walls, they will direct their things will become at least slightly more organized and not as crazy making.
Right.
And I just love the practical aspect of that, because it's not about like addressing deep issues like disrespect or unequal housework. It's like, we're going to solve this problem very physically and very practically.
But it also can work for more complicated or intrinsic ideas in life, because I was thinking how that could be implied in a corporate environment or any work environment. If you put something up to facilitate or help a cohesive group of people working together, then they come together and resolve their issues. So how's that, Adele?
Oh, yeah. Yes. And also, I think hooks and baskets, just this like idea of taking a nuts and bolts approach to problem solving has been my lifeline, because I had no idea that I had a very unusual brain. I definitely struggled in school. And then one day according to everyone, no one knows what exactly happened, but I just sort of quote unquote figured it out. And in terms of practically, I really, my brain could not hold on to very basic things like my schedule of classes and the order that I was supposed to go from class to class, So I instituted a very strict system of physical organization with a folder for every class and my schedule copied and glued onto every folder, where I really just was taking advantage of the physical world to make up for my memory deficiencies. And I just sort of quote unquote figured it out. And just overnight, I became like a C and a D student to a straight A student in just the nick of time in high school. And I have, it's the equivalent of hooks and baskets that I have to thank for that. Just such a sort of simple physical solution to a very sort of deep and difficult problem.
Yeah, I can imagine must have been very challenging socially, especially when you're getting into junior high and high school. But you figured it out on your own, which often I think a lot of people don't give themselves credit for doing that. Was your grandmother, did she live near you when you were growing up? Did you see her on a regular basis, Sadie?
She moved. Unfortunately for me, she did not live near me at all. She lived in Tucson, but my brother's last 2 years of high school, she lived in Tampa, and he really benefited from having grandma there, picking him up every morning and taking him to get a bagel before school every day.
Oh, great. So when you think of her, and you obviously think of her a lot, what what words, because you're a journalist, what words describe her to you?
It's funny because, like, actually, that's my biggest weakness is physical descriptions because I have no visual memory at all. My grandma, I know that she's very beautiful. Everyone always says that. And everyone says I look like her. So I'm really hoping that I will be a pretty old lady someday. She's very creative. Oh, and she's so positive all the time. Um, and it comes from a very authentic place. Like, she brings a sense of wonder to what she's seeing and doing all the time. Like, one time she was visiting me in DC, and there were she saw that our subway has this sort of like awning that's kind of beautiful. It's a little bit art deco, and she said, "Oh my gosh, what is that beautiful sculpture?" I'm like, it's an awning. But she just sees art everywhere, and she just brings like sort of a very light, happy energy to everything she does. And interestingly, though, she said that this was not the case when she was young. She was the moody, dark, angsty sister of her pair. She had a younger sister who was a little ray of sunshine, and she was not. And she doesn't really have a great explanation for what happened either, but I think she just sort of figured it out and stopped taking herself and life so seriously.
Wow, if you can talk to Adele later today, find out how she did that or what triggered that, because there are a lot of people
I mean, she says it was therapy. I think she said it was a lot of therapy.
Oh, that's great. That's fantastic. And more readily available these days than ever before. So that's something we all should consider. Do you remember her? Because I know right now you're swinging on a porch swing, which was really fun for me to see that before we started recording. When you think of being with her, did she bake apple pies? Is she a good cook? What were some of the comfort things?
She's a terrible, terrible cook. She made everyone hate oatmeal just because of the way she made it. She would just sort of like put on a pot of oatmeal early in the morning, and it would sort of turn to glue, and it was just awful. I mean, I can't think of her cooking anything. And when she did, we all just begged her not to. But what I remember is her glazing these enormous pots that my grandpa would make. And when they lived in Tucson, they did a type of pottery called raku, where it involved dropping these like my grandpa, who was a tiny little man, would have these huge tongs, and they were bright red hot, and he would pull these pots out of the kiln and then place them gently into a pit in the earth that was lined with newspapers, and the whole thing would go up in spectacular flames. And my grandpa made the pots, and my grandma glazed them before they went into the flames.
Fire, right?
And
it's pretty
the
great.
lips of fire came out in these like gorgeous metallic colors. So when I think of my grandma, I think of giant pots, beautiful, beautiful, huge pots. We put gladiolas in them. They were so tall.
Oh my gosh, that's so wonderful. Was her sister artistic, the ray of sunshine that she had a tough time with?
Oh my gosh, I don't know, and I've never asked, actually. And strangely, my grandmother had no memories of her sister until she had some sort of surgical procedure. And then it was the craziest thing. All of a sudden, she said she could remember, she could like bring up her sister's face and remember what she sounded like, and all of these things that she had somehow lost access to.
Neurodivergent conditions like this, is this a genetic thing that's passed down?
I don't think that my grandmother had SDAM, which I don't know if we covered. It stands for Severely Deficient Autobiographical Memory. But I don't think she did, because she's an artist, and she had sort of a beautiful, I think she could remember things in detail and sensory detail and maybe relive them. But my brother actually also has SDAM. I think my uncle does too on my dad's side. Oh yeah, this is my grandma's also on my dad's side. So yeah, it's definitely genetic. I mean, I think it's almost certainly got a strong genetic component if it's not 100% genetic.
Sure. But she went to the arts, which I think is wonderful because you say it, you have to do all this extra work, this prep, this storage of images and all that. I mean, to become someone, whether you're in the business world or finance or an attorney, that to me would be, it's already overwhelming to me, but but to have a condition like this and try and retain those facts and that information. So maybe she was intentionally led to the arts.
Yeah, and I think just self-expression and sort of making meaning out of the chaos of life was really important to her.
Adele, we're saying hi and thank you for being part of Sadie's life. Sadie, this remarkable young lady who's a reporter and has written this book that I want to talk about. Do you really kind of sort of not remember writing it? Do I know you?
It's a blur. But I really don't. Like, it was almost a year of my life that I spent on my back porch swing, just like writing and writing and writing. And, and I remember that I wrote it. I remember that I had a routine where I would write from about 6 a.m. to noon and then at noon, for some reason, my brain just switches off. So I'm kind of done with real work for the day. And I can only do things like weeding and things like that. So yeah, I really don't remember writing it the same way that I think normal writers do. But again, I think this is kind of a gift because there was definitely a lot of struggle in there and I kind of forgot it. It's almost like giving birth, I guess. I mean, I wouldn't know. I've never given birth, but from what I've heard, people forget that what a nightmare.
You forget. So that's the blessing part of it. Your glass is half full versus half empty. And I would imagine it takes a while for someone to get to the place where you are. But I'm curious, before you went and did all these studies, because you didn't do these studies to get a significant diagnosis, right, until you were maybe in your 40s. Do you wish you hadn't done the studies?
No, there have been drawbacks for sure. When I discovered I didn't have any sort of visual memory, and I also am stereo blind, which means I only look out of one eye at a time. I actually got worse. So I got worse at bird watching, which is one of my favorite hobbies. Like, it undermined my confidence to know these ways in which I was not well suited to this hobby. And it made me worse for a little while. But now I think that what you gain in sort of wisdom, you can eventually bootstrap your way into doing, even better. So I now know that since I'm stereo blind, when other people are trying to point out birds to me, I cannot follow the direction of their point. I am always going to look farther and higher than they are trying to indicate. And so knowing this, now I know to take a picture with my cell phone and that makes the scene flat in front of us. And then as long as we're talking about a fairly stationary bird, someone can actually like draw on the picture or where the bird is.
Well, there's so many really cool things here. You've been given all this information, which what I can imagine is kind of like getting hit in the head with too much information. And your brain had to transition and kind of figure it out. But then you've turned the whole thing around again because you know that you've been able to live with this for so long. You know your workarounds. You know how you've had an amazing life. You've done all this really impressive work. So you can't let it hold you back. You don't allow it to hold you back.
It's hard not to see it as a great gift that I have such an unusual brain. Because I already was a science writer and specifically I wrote about neuroscience and psychology. And I had no idea that I had this really interesting, thing with me this whole time to write about that no one else has the perspective on that I have. So, I just feel lucky.
That's pretty impressive. This might be a really silly question, but Do you have a nickname or something that you call your your two brains?
For like my brain, for my weird brain. Gosh, I don't, but I should.
Oh, you should.
Actually, I dedicated my whole book to my weird brain.
Oh, great.
Because I think people often dedicate things to, their partners or husbands, but really it was my brain that all along, had tricked me into thinking that it was normal, and while being very unusual enough to interest like 7 different teams of scientists across the country, which gave me an amazing opportunity to learn about how neurotypical brains work. And every brain is a miracle. It's just astonishing the work that your brain does, and it feels effortless, but it's not effortless. It's a lot of calculations. It's so much work. And even when my brain sort of goes off the rails, it's going off the rails in a really interesting and intelligent way.
And you keep moving forward. You may take a half a step to the side and not backwards. But I think it's a good message for anyone listening, so that there are workarounds and you can keep moving forward and you can keep producing work and you can keep living your life.
It's the gift of having a poor memory, is that you do live in the moment in a way that people who can relive moments from their past and vivid visual or emotional details, they can get lost in that. But I have no such problem. I always live in the present moment.
Wow, that's very impressive. Oh, Sadie Dingfelder, your book is called Do I Know You? Faceblind Reporter's Journey into the Science of Sight, Memory, and Imagination. And you're on Instagram, Twitter, X, LinkedIn, and I'll have all these links in my show notes. And there is one just funny story in the minutes we have left of how you mistook a gentleman in a grocery store.
Yes. I was the thing that sort of kicked off my whole sort of nerdy midlife crisis is that I was in a grocery store with my husband, following him around, and I just all of a sudden I noticed he was putting things in the cart that were very out of character. He's a big snob about food. He makes his own nut butter a lot of the time, so I couldn't believe he put like a Safeway Select brand peanut butter with probably full of sugar into our cart. And so I pulled it out and I said, "Since when do you buy generic?" And I looked at my husband and he looked completely horrified. And it was the look on his face of like horror that I'd never seen before that alerted me to the fact that he was not my husband. And I dropped the peanut butter and I just ran off. And he was just wearing the same jacket as my husband, and he was sort of like Steve shaped, but he really didn't look anything like my husband. And later, when I was reflecting on it, I thought, wow, like I was faster to notice the wrong label on a peanut butter jar than the wrong face on my husband. And I'm like, this is not the kind of mistake that normal people make. and could there be something wrong with my brain? So, I think, again, a neurotypical person might have gone to a doctor, but since I'm a science writer and I just started doing research and started joining scientific studies, and I found out all of these things about my brain that are very atypical and have been hiding in plain sight my whole life.
Oh my gosh, Sadie Dingfelder. Do I Know You? A faceblind reporter's journey into the science of sight, memory, and imagination. Thank you for all that you're doing for so many people that could use this insight and information. And please say hi to your grandmother, Adele.
Oh, I will. I'm visiting her soon. I can't wait.
We'll be back next week with another episode of Should Have Listened to My Mother.